Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into one of the most fascinating and often misunderstood chapters in human history, ancient Rome. This was the empire of mighty legions, powerful emperors, stunning marble statues, shocking betrayals, and that one guy who supposedly played music while the whole city went up in flames. Before we get started, if you like what I do here, hit that like button and subscribe, but only if it feels right to you. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from and what's the time there? It's always cool to see how people from all over the world are joining in at different hours. Let's kick things off with one of the biggest myths out there, the idea that every gladiator fight ended in death, sealed by an emperor's thumbs down signal. Picture this: two warriors step into the massive arena, the crowd goes wild, sand kicks up under their feet, and one guy drops to his knees. The emperor casually flips his thumb like he's scrolling through reviews on his phone, and boom, death. But hold on, that's not how it really worked. If every fight was a sure kill, Rome would have run out of gladiators faster than you can say weekend. Truth is, gladiators were a huge investment. They trained in special schools called ludus, where they got top-notch care. Think high-protein meals like meat, beans, and grains to build muscle, daily workouts to stay in peak shape, and even doctors who knew all about fixing broken bones or torn muscles from sports injuries. Yeah, these guys were more like today's pro athletes, think boxers or wrestlers, than just throwaway fighters. Training one could take months or even years, with costs for food, a place to sleep, weapons, armor, and all that medical help. No smart Roman was going to waste that kind of money by killing them off after one show. It'd be like burning cash for fun. Fights were planned out like a good action movie. You'd have a heavily armored guy with a big shield facing off against someone quick and nimble with a net and trident. It was all about balance, strength versus speed, power versus skill, to keep the excitement high. Sure, there was real danger, with cuts, bruises, and sometimes worse, but the point was to create tension, not just non-stop killing. After a bunch of guaranteed deaths, even the rowdy Roman crowd would get bored and start checking the time on their sundials. A lot of matches ended with surrender. The losing gladiator would raise a finger like saying, "I give up," and the crowd would yell their opinions. The person paying for the games, often a rich politician trying to win votes, made the final call. And guess what? Survival happened way more often than you think. Why kill a star performer when you can bring him back for more fights? These gladiators built real fame. Their names showed up as graffiti on walls in places like Pompeii, scratched in by fans. Women swooned over them, kids idolized them, and crowds cheered for their favorites. You can't have repeat stars if they're always dying after round one. Of course, there were deadly moments. Some fights went too far, and executions did happen, especially for criminals or prisoners thrown in as extras. The arena was brutal and risky, no doubt about it. Rome craved violence, but they also loved making money, and a good gladiator franchise was pure gold. It wasn't just about blood. It was about the story, the hype, and keeping people coming back for more. Now about that famous thumb gesture, it's another mix-up that won't go away. In movies, thumbs down means kill him, and thumbs up means let him live. But ancient records aren't that clear. They talk about pollice verso, which just means with a turned thumb. Turned how? No one says exactly. Some experts think sticking the thumb out like a sword meant finish him, while tucking it into a fist like a sheathed weapon meant spare his life. So that dramatic downward thumb, it might be totally backward, or not even the real signal at all. This myth probably exploded thanks to a famous 19th century painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme called Pollice Verso. It shows the crowd thumbs down, demanding blood, and it looked so intense that everyone ran with it, especially Hollywood directors. But paintings aren't facts. They're just one artist's take. In real life, the decision was messy and loud. The crowd waved handkerchiefs, shouted chants like "Iugula," "Throat him" or "Mit," "Let him go," and the sponsor listened to keep everyone happy. It was like a wild vote in a packed stadium, full of politics and emotion. Sparing a brave fighter could make the sponsor look merciful and boost his popularity. Killing a weak one might please the bloodthirsty fans. It wasn't a quiet emperor's solo act. It was chaotic Roman democracy in action. So next time you see that slow thumbs down in a film, remember, history loves drama, but it's often fuzzier than the movies make it. One painter's idea turned into a global myth, and we've been repeating it ever since. The classic Roman party myth, the Vomitorium. You know, where fancy diners stuff themselves with food, head to a special room to throw up, then come back for more. It sounds wild and over the top, just like the stories of Rome's wild side. But nope, that's not what a vomitorium was at all. The word vomitorium comes from Latin, meaning a place where things are vomited out like crowds pouring out of a big building. It was actually a wide hallway or exit in places like the Colosseum or theaters, designed to let thousands of people leave quickly without a stampede. Think of it as a smart crowd control feature, not a gross pit stop during dinner. How did this mix-up happen? Probably because the word sounds yucky and fits the image of Romans as super decadent. Sure, rich Romans threw lavish banquets to show off. Hosts would serve crazy dishes like roasted peacocks, stuffed dormice, little mice, flamingo tongues, or piles of oysters and snails. Guests reclined on couches, sipping wine from fancy cups, while slaves brought more food. It was a status thing. The bigger the feast, the more impressive you looked. Did some people eat too much and get sick? Yeah, that happens anywhere with unlimited food and wine. Ancient writers like Seneca complained about overeating and even mentioned folks forcing themselves to vomit to make room for more. But it wasn't a standard custom or part of polite etiquette. There were no built-in vomit rooms in homes or party halls. That'd be messy and weird. Imagine pausing a fancy meal to line up in a hallway for that. No thanks. Most Romans weren't living like that anyway. The average person ate basic stuff. Bread from wheat or barley, olives, cheese, veggies like cabbage or leeks, and maybe some cheap fish or pork if they could afford it. They lived in small apartments, worked hard jobs, and didn't have time for endless feasts. The wild banquet stories are from the super-rich elite, like senators or merchants. And even they didn't make vomiting a group activity. This myth sticks around because it paints Rome as this empire of non-stop luxury and downfall, like they partied themselves to ruin. But really, Rome was practical too. They built amazing roads, aqueducts, and yes, efficient exits for big events. Sometimes a fancy word just means a doorway, not a diet disaster. One of the most famous pictures of Rome's chaos. The city is on fire, people are panicking in the streets, smoke fills the air, and Emperor Nero chills on his balcony, playing a violin like nothing's wrong. It's a killer story about a crazy leader ignoring disaster. But it's mostly made up. First off, violins weren't invented back then, that came centuries later in the Middle Ages. Nero might have played a lyre, a stringed instrument like a small harp, but even that's not the point. Ancient reports say he wasn't even in Rome when the Great Fire started in 64 AD. He was chilling in Antium, now Anzio, about 35 miles away on the coast, enjoying a vacation spot. When he heard about the fire, he supposedly hurried back and helped organize relief, handing out food, opening his gardens for homeless people, and even paying for some rebuilding. Nero was a weird emperor, no doubt. He loved performing songs and poems in public, which shocked a lot of Romans because emperors were supposed to act serious and tough, not like entertainers. He entered music contests and always won surprise, built huge theaters, and threw himself into the arts. But the fiddling while Rome burns tale seems to come from later historians like Tacitus and Suetonius, who wrote after Nero died. They worked for new emperors who hated Nero and wanted to trash his reputation. So they exaggerated his flaws to make the new guys look better. Did Nero maybe start the fire? Rumors flew because after it destroyed big chunks of the city, killing hundreds and leaving thousands homeless, he built his massive golden house palace on the cleared land. It had over 300 rooms, gold-covered walls, ivory ceilings, rotating dining rooms, and even a huge statue of himself. Talk about bad timing for PR. People whispered he wanted the space for his dream home. To shift blame, Nero pointed fingers at Christians, calling them arsonists and starting brutal persecutions, like feeding them to lions or burning them as torches. Was he guilty? We don't have solid proof either way. Fires were common in ancient Rome with its wooden buildings, crowded streets, and open flames for cooking. This one started in shops near the Circus Maximus and raged for 6 days, fueled by wind. Nero might have been innocent or maybe not, but the music playing part. That's likely just a dramatic add-on to make him seem extra heartless. Legends like this endure because they're so vivid, they capture the idea of a leader out of touch with real people. Nero was dramatic and power-hungry, but history isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's a mix of facts, rumors, and storytelling. If you imagine ancient Rome, you probably see everyone in flowing white sheets, striding around like they're in a costume party. That's the toga, right? But no, togas weren't everyday clothes. They were special, like a suit you wear to a wedding or important meeting. A toga was a big piece of wool fabric, about 20 feet long, draped in fancy folds around the body. It took skill to put on, often with help from a slave, and it was heavy, hot, and hard to move in. You couldn't run, work, or even eat easily without it falling apart. In Rome's warm weather, wearing thick wool all day, miserable. Even ancient writers griped about it, calling it cumbersome. For daily life, most men wore tunics, simple knee-length shirts made of lighter fabric, easy to move in. Women had similar dresses called stolas. Workers like farmers or builders wore tough pants or shorts for their jobs. Soldiers had leather armor and helmets. Only for big occasions, like Senate meetings, court, or festivals, did free male citizens pull out the toga. It showed you were a real Roman with rights. No slaves or foreigners could wear one. There were types too, plain white for regular guys, purple bordered for leaders or boys becoming men in a ceremony. It was a symbol of status, like a badge saying, "I'm important." Wearing it wrong could embarrass you big time, so Rome wasn't a sea of white sheets everywhere. It was practical tunics for the grind, togas for the show. We think of them that way because statues and paintings focus on the fancy stuff, but real life was simpler. Last one for now. Julius Caesar wasn't an emperor. Yeah, he was huge in history, the guy who crossed the Rubicon, conquered Gaul, modern France, and got stabbed by his friends on the Ides of March. But his title was Dictator Perpetuo, meaning boss for life, not emperor. Rome started as a republic around 509 BC, after kicking out their kings. It had a system to share power. Elected senators debated laws, consuls led for a year, and there were checks so no one got too strong. Caesar rose through the ranks as a general and politician, winning battles and gaining fans. In 44 BC, after civil wars, the Senate gave him permanent power to fix Rome's problems, like debt, corruption, and unrest. But emperor came later with his adopted son, Octavian, who became Augustus in 27 BC. Augustus kept the republic's look, but held all the real control, starting the empire era with titles like Princeps, First Citizen. Caesar paved the way, but he was the last big republican leader, not the first emperor. This mix-up happens because Caesar's name became a title like Kaiser in German or Tsar in Russian. He was powerful, sure, but in a crumbling republic, not a full empire. History loves to simplify, but the details make it even cooler. Now, in reality, that republican system had been cracking under pressure for decades before Caesar showed up. Political fights were turning violent. Think street brawls between rival groups, assassinations of key leaders, and mobs rioting in the Forum. Powerful generals like Pompey and Sulla were gathering huge personal armies that answered to them, not the state. Loyalty shifted from Rome's laws to whoever paid the soldiers best or promised the most land after victories. It was a recipe for chaos, with the old checks and balances failing to keep one guy from grabbing too much control. Enter Julius Caesar, a sharp-minded general with a knack for self-promotion. He came from a noble but broke family, so he built his fame through bold moves. After spending years conquering Gaul, what we now call France, and parts of Belgium, Switzerland, and Germany, he brought back tons of treasure, slaves, and stories of epic battles. His troops loved him because he fought alongside them, shared their hardships, and rewarded them richly. But crossing the Rubicon River in 49 BC with his army, that was a big no-no. It was the border where generals were supposed to disband their forces before entering Italy proper. By marching on Rome, he basically declared war on the Senate and his rival Pompey, sparking a brutal civil war that tore the Republic apart. Caesar won, of course, defeating Pompey's forces in battles across the Mediterranean, from Spain to Egypt. But he didn't crown himself emperor. Instead, he took the title of Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, a role that was meant to be temporary in emergencies, like during wars or crises. He used it to push reforms, fixing the calendar. Our July is named after him, cancelling debts for the poor, expanding citizenship to more people in the provinces, and even planning big public works like draining swamps for farmland. The difference matters because Emperor suggests a whole new system of one-man rule baked into law. Caesar was still operating under the Republic's umbrella, even if he stretched it to the breaking point. That distinction is key, but it didn't save him. In 44 BC, on the Ides of March 15, a group of about 60 senators, including his supposed friend Brutus, stabbed him 23 times right in the Senate House. They saw themselves as heroes saving the Republic from a tyrant, shouting things like liberty as they did it. Spoiler, it backfired big time. Instead of bringing back the old balanced system, the assassination kicked off even more civil wars. Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man, teamed up with Octavian, Caesar's adopted nephew, and another guy named Lepidus to hunt down the killers. Then they turned on each other, with battles like Actium in 31 BC, where Octavian's navy crushed Antony and Cleopatra's forces. In the end, Octavian came out on top. He cleverly rebranded himself as Augustus in 27 BC, meaning the revered one. He kept the facade of the Republic, senators still met, elections happened, but he held all the real power through titles like princeps, first citizen, and control over the army. That's when the Roman Empire truly began, a more organized, long-lasting version of one-man rule. Ironically, those senators who killed Caesar to stop a dictator ended up paving the way for emperors who ruled for centuries. History loves those twists. It's like the universe has a sarcastic laugh at human plans. You ask most folks when Rome fell, they'll point to 476 AD and say, that's it, end of story. It sounds tidy, like a movie wrapping up with a big finale. But real history is messier, more like a slow fade than a sudden crash. Sure, 476 is when a Germanic warlord named Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a kid named Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer sent the imperial symbols back to the east and declared himself king of Italy. Textbooks call that the fall of Rome, but by then, the Western Empire was already a shadow of its former self. The decline had been building for generations. Starting in the 3rd century, emperors came and went like bad weather. Some lasted weeks, assassinated by their own guards or overthrown in coups. The crisis of the 3rd century saw over 20 emperors in 50 years, with constant civil wars sucking up money and men. Borders crumbled under waves of migrations. Tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns pushed in, sometimes as raiders looting cities, other times as foederati, allies hired to defend Rome, but who often switched sides when payments stopped or opportunities arose. In 410 AD, the Visigoths even sacked Rome itself. The first time in 800 years enemies breached the walls. The economy tanked too. Inflation skyrocketed as emperors debased coins, mixing in cheaper metals. Taxes crushed farmers, leading to abandoned lands, and trade routes got disrupted by pirates and bandits. Recruiting soldiers became tough. Fewer citizens wanted to serve long terms far from home, so Rome relied more on mercenaries who weren't always loyal. It wasn't one big bang. It was like a grand old building with cracks spreading, leaky roofs, weak leadership, crumbling foundations, economic woes, and storms pounding the walls, invasions. And here's what gets overlooked. The Eastern Roman Empire didn't fall in 476. Based in Constantinople, modern Istanbul, it kept going strong for another 1,000 years as what we call the Byzantine Empire. They preserved Roman laws, like Justinian's Code in the 6th century, Greek-Roman culture, grand churches like Hagia Sophia, and even reconquered parts of the West temporarily. So Rome lived on in the East, trading with Asia, fighting off Persians and later Arabs, until the Ottomans took Constantinople in 1453 in the West. It wasn't a total wipeout either. Germanic kingdoms rose up, but they adopted Roman ways, using Latin for laws, keeping aqueducts running and blending with local Romans. Figures like Theodoric the Ostrogoth ruled Italy as a Roman king, respecting old traditions. Roman ideas shaped medieval Europe. Think feudal systems echoing Roman estates, or the Catholic Church stepping in as a new authority. The empire didn't vanish, it morphed into new forms. We like the 476 date because it's simple, but empires erode over time, adapting and lingering. Rome's legacy is in our laws, languages, and cities today, proving it never really fell overnight. Movies love showing ancient Rome as one big, endless luxury bash. Sprawling villas with mosaic floors, people lounging on silk cushions, slaves fanning them with palm leaves, popping grapes into mouths, and rivers of wine while chatting about the latest Senate drama. And sure, that glitzy world existed for a super small group of super-rich elites, like senators or wealthy traders who threw parties to network and show off. But zooming in on that ignores the other 99% of Romans, making it seem like everyone lived in non-stop extravagance. Truth is, most folks were grinding through daily life, not partying. Rome was a bustling megacity of over 1 million people, like an ancient version of New York or Tokyo. Bakers rose before dawn to fire up ovens, kneading dough for the daily bread ration that kept the poor from rioting. Blacksmiths sweated over forges, hammering out nails, tools, or horseshoes. Merchants haggled in packed markets over olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, or spices from the East. Laborers hauled heavy loads through narrow, noisy streets. Think construction workers building apartments, insulae, or porters carrying amphorae of goods from the Tiber River docks. Outside the city, farmers toiled on small plots or huge estates, planting wheat, tending vineyards, and praying for good rains while dodging high taxes that could force them into debt. Even the upper class wasn't all fun and games. Senators had to juggle politics, showing up at the forum for debates, building alliances through marriages or favors, and maintaining a spotless public image. Too much visible excess could backfire. People might call you corrupt or weak, hurting your career. Wine was everywhere, yeah, but Romans usually mixed it with water, up to 3 parts water to 1 wine, to stretch it and stay sharp. Drinking it straight was seen as barbaric, like something uncivilized foreigners did. Hangovers weren't glamorous when you had to run an empire. Of course, there were wild outliers, emperors like Caligula, who supposedly made his horse a senator and threw insane feasts, or Commodus, who fought as a gladiator for kicks and lived like a spoiled rock star. Aristocrats might serve bizarre dishes like sow's udders or giraffe meat to wow guests. But those stories stand out because they were rare and shocking. Even ancient writers gossiped about them as scandals. If everyone was that over the top, no one would bother recording it. What really kept Rome running for so long wasn't wild living, it was smart systems. Roads connected provinces for trade, aqueducts brought water, laws standardized justice, and the army enforced peace. You can't manage an empire from Britain to Egypt if everyone's too drunk or distracted. The decadence caused the fall. Myth is a neat moral tale, like a warning story, but it's oversimplified. Rome had flaws: slavery, inequality, overexpansion, but it thrived on discipline and organization. Ordinary Romans focused on work, family, and getting by, just like people today. There's this epic image in our heads: a solid wall of Roman shields, soldiers in perfect rows, red capes billowing, marching forward like an unstoppable force. And yeah, the legions were top tier, tough, well-drilled, and clever, but unbeatable gods of war, not even close. They had their share of epic fails. Roman soldiers trained hard, marching 20 miles a day with 60-pound packs, practicing sword drills, building bridges or forts on the fly. They innovated too, using testudo turtle formations where shields overlapped like a tank, or siege engines like ballistae to hurl rocks. But in 9 AD, disaster struck in the Teutoburg forest. 3 legions, about 20,000 men, under General Verus, trusted a local ally named Arminius, who was secretly a Germanic chief plotting revenge. He led them into a trap: dense woods where Roman lines couldn't form up, muddy paths slowing heavy armor, and ambushes from hidden warriors. Arrows rained down, close quarters fights broke out, and the legions were wiped out. Emperor Augustus reportedly banged his head yelling, "Verus, give me back my legions." Rome never pushed deep into Germany after that, drawing the line at the Rhine River. Other losses piled up. In 53 BC at Carrhae, Parthian horse archers shredded Crassus's army with hit-and-run tactics, killing 20,000 Romans. Civil wars like those after Caesar's death bled the military dry, with Romans fighting Romans. Later, as the empire weakened, corruption meant underpaid troops deserted, or generals rebelled for the throne. Rome's real power wasn't never losing, it was bouncing back. After Teutoburg, they fortified borders and adapted, recruiting more auxiliaries from provinces, improving scouts. The army changed over time, from citizen volunteers to full-time pros, from flexible maniples, small units to larger cohorts. But when logistics failed, like supply lines stretching too far or politics rotted the core, defeats mounted. Invincibility is a myth for stories. Resilience is what history remembers. Rome kept getting up after knocks for centuries, until the hits were too many. For whatever reason, people imagine ancient Romans sloshing through filthy streets, covered in mud and who knows what, clueless about basic cleanliness. But that's way off. By old world standards, they were pretty hygienic pros. Public baths were a huge deal, scattered all over the empire, from tiny neighborhood spots to massive complexes like the baths of Caracalla in Rome, which could hold 1,600 people. For a cheap coin or two, anyone could go. Hot rooms, caldarium with steam to sweat out dirt, warm areas, tepidarium for relaxing, cold plunges, frigidarium to cool off, and even gyms for wrestling or ball games. Folks oiled up their skin, scraped it clean with a curved tool called a strigil, like a squeegee for sweat and grime, and chatted away. Baths weren't just for washing. They were social spots where deals got made, news spread, and friends hung out, like a combo of spa, coffee shop, and community center. Then there were the aqueducts, engineering wonders like the Aqua Pier or Pont du Gard, channeling fresh water from springs miles away into cities. Rome had over 500 miles of these, feeding public fountains, private homes for the rich, and even flushing sewers. The Cloaca Maxima, a massive underground drain built around 600 BC, carried waste from streets to the Tiber River, keeping things from turning into a swamp. Sure, it wasn't modern sterile. Bath water got reused among crowds. They didn't know about germs, and soap was basic, made from fat and ashes, more for hair than body. But compared to other ancient folks, Romans were ahead. Egyptians bathed in rivers, Greeks had simpler setups. The dirty Romans stereotype probably comes from later Middle Ages, when wars and plagues cut bathing habits, and cities got grimier without Roman infrastructure. Cleanliness tied into status. A fresh, groomed look showed you were respectable and Roman. Not everyone had luxury access. Country folks washed in streams, poor city dwellers used public facilities less often. But overall, Romans invested big in hygiene because it kept people healthy and society running. You don't build 11 aqueducts for Rome alone if you're fine with filth. It's funny, some post-Roman eras were dirtier, which flips the script on what we assume. We often think of Roman society in black and white. Fancy senators in villas feasting under frescoes versus chained slaves toiling in mines or galleys. Both were real, but that's like saying modern society is just billionaires and the homeless, missing the huge middle. Slavery was core and cruel. Millions captured in wars or born into it, working farms, households, or brutal spots like quarries. They had no rights, could be beaten or sold, though some skilled ones, teachers, accountants, got better treatment and freedom. But between elites and slaves, a whole bustling middle class. Free citizens and freedmen, ex-slaves, ran the show. Shop owners selling cloth or wine, artisans making glassware, shoes, or statues. Bakers churned out loaves in wood-fired ovens. Teachers drilled kids in reading and math. Doctors mixed herbs for cures, using tools like scalpels that look modern. Lawyers hustled in courts. Builders erected tenements. Bankers loaned money at interest. Trade boomed. Merchants shipped grain from Egypt or olive oil from Tunisia, getting rich enough to buy villas. Freedmen could climb high. Many started businesses, like the famous Trimalchio in stories, who went from slave to millionaire. Social snobs looked down on them, but money talked. Bureaucrats kept the empire's paperwork flowing, tax records, census data. Inequality was massive. The top 1% owned half the land. Slums were rough with fires and floods. But most Romans were in that middle, paying rents, shopping at markets, celebrating festivals, raising kids. They worried about bread prices, job security, and family health. In other words, they lived ordinary lives, a lot like us, in a world that was far more layered than the extremes we picture. We love to boil ancient Rome down to its flashiest bits: wild spectacles in the arena, piles of gold in fancy villas, and brutal conquests that make for great movies. But that's missing the real glue that held the empire together for over 1,000 years. It wasn't just the big-shot aristocrats chasing glory. or the endless forced labor from slaves. No, what kept things running day after day was the everyday hustle of millions of ordinary people in a massive working economy. Shopkeepers haggling over prices in bustling markets, builders stacking bricks for new roads or aqueducts, teachers drilling Latin grammar into kids' heads, and administrators scribbling records to keep taxes flowing. These folks weren't in the history books much, but they were the backbone. Empires don't last on showy parades and parties alone. They thrive because of the quiet, steady work that makes everything tick. Rome wasn't all about decay and cruelty. It was a huge, messy society full of people just trying to get by in a tough world. That everyday side might not be as exciting as tales of marble feasts, but it's way closer to the truth. If you think ancient Romans truly saw every emperor as a godlike superhero straight from the skis, complete with halos and miracles, let's pump the brakes. The real story is way more nuanced. Sure, emperor worship was a thing. After some rulers died, the Senate would vote to deify them in a ceremony called apotheosis, turning them into official gods. Temples popped up in their honor, statues were carved showing them with divine symbols like eagles or laurels, and coins stamped with titles like divus. Divines spread the idea far and wide. But did every Roman buy into it hook, line, and sinker? Not really. Roman religion was more about going through the motions than deep personal faith. You showed up for rituals, burned a bit of incense at an emperor's altar, or joined a parade to prove your loyalty to the state. It was like a civic duty, blending politics and religion to keep everyone on the same page. In fact, most deifications happened after death. Augustus set the trend when the Senate declared him a god in 14 AD, right after he passed, to honor his long, stable rule and pass some of that glow to his successors. But when living emperors pushed the "I'm a god now" vibe too hard, like Caligula demanding temples while alive or Domitian insisting people call him Lord and God, it freaked people out. Romans saw it as cocky or even crazy, clashing with their practical traditions. In the western parts of the empire, like Italy, it was toned down to respect and symbolism, not full-on worship. But in the east, where old Greek and Egyptian kingdoms had long treated rulers as divine, it fit right in. Provinces like Egypt or Asia Minor had pharaohs and kings who'd been gods for centuries. This whole setup was smart propaganda. Declaring an emperor divine helped glue the vast empire together, from Britain to Syria, by giving everyone a shared figure to rally around. It boosted the ruler's authority without needing constant force. Most folks approached it practically: do the rituals, stay out of trouble, and get on with life. Privately, they might roll their eyes or stick to older gods like Jupiter, king of the skis, Mars, war god, or Venus, love and beauty, plus local spirits or new cults from places like Persia. Rome's faith was a big mix, tolerant of variety as long as you didn't rock the boat. So no, it wasn't a land of starry-eyed fanatics bowing to every emperor as a walking miracle. It was a savvy society that mixed symbols, power plays, and public shows, blurring lines between church and state in ways that might feel familiar today. We already busted the myth that every gladiator fight was a death match. Now let's flip another one. The idea that all gladiators were shackled prisoners dragged kicking and screaming into the sand. Yeah, many were slaves, captured in wars from places like Gaul or Thrace, or criminals sentenced to the arena as punishment. They'd be bought at auctions, thrown into training schools, and forced to fight for their lives. That's the grim side, no doubt. But here's the twist: not everyone was unwilling. Some gladiators volunteered. Free Roman citizens, even from decent families, signed up on purpose. These guys were called auctorati, and they'd ink a contract for a few years of service, often to pay off crushing debts, escape poverty, or chase the spotlight. Why on earth would anyone choose that? Well, the arena wasn't just a death pit. It was a shot at stardom in a society where social climbing was tough. Rome idolized winners. Successful gladiators got fan mail or the ancient version, graffiti praising them on tavern walls, admirers tossing flowers, and even poems written about their bravery. Women from high society sometimes had crushes on them, seeing them as rugged heroes. If you survived and won big, you could earn fat purses from sponsors, buy your freedom, or retire rich. The big moment was getting the rudies, a wooden sword symbolizing "you're done, no more fights." Some ex-gladiators became trainers or bodyguards, living comfortably, gladiator schools or ludi weren't hellholes either. Run like pro sports academies, they had strict schedules, morning sword practice, afternoon strength training with weights or dummies, and evenings for rest. Diets were protein-packed, barley porridge earning them the nickname barley men, meat and veggies to bulk up. Doctors treated wounds with herbs, bandages, and even early surgery. Owners invested because a top fighter could draw huge crowds and make money, but let's be real, it was still savage. Broken bones, deep cuts, and the constant risk of dying made it no joke. The point is, gladiators weren't all victims. Some were coerced, others desperate for a way out of dead-end lives, and a few ambitious thrill-seekers betting on glory. In a world with limited options, the arena offered a wild ladder up, terrifying, bloody, but uniquely Roman in its mix of danger and dream. If your mental picture of Roman women is them quietly hovering in the shadows of grand halls, hands folded while men handled everything from wars to wills, you're only getting a sliver of the truth. Legally, yeah, they were sidelined. No voting in elections, no running for office like consul or senator, no official say in the assemblies where laws got debated. Fathers or husbands often controlled their affairs early on, under a system called patria potestas. But in real life, Roman women, especially from wealthy families, had way more pull than the rules suggested. Take the elite ladies. They ran huge households like mini empires, overseeing slaves, finances, and education for kids. They owned property outright, buying land, villas, or shops, and could inherit fortunes without a man's say-so. Widows in particular hit the jackpot of independence. Without a husband or father bossing them, they managed estates, invested in trade, like wine exports or brick factories, and even lent money at interest. Some became patrons, donating cash for temples, roads, or games to boost their family's rep. Inscriptions on old stones thank women like Tyria or Eumatia for funding public fountains or markets. Behind closed doors, or sometimes right in the open, they shaped politics. Livia Drusilla, Augustus's wife, was a master at this. For over 50 years, she whispered advice, brokered deals, and used her web of friends to sway decisions, all without a title. She even got statues and honors usually reserved for men. Agrippina the younger schemed to make her son Nero emperor, pulling strings in the palace like a pro-Messalina, Claudius's wife, got infamous for her affairs and power grabs, showing how far influence could go until it backfired. Marriages were power tools too. Women liked these arranged unions that linked families, creating alliances that could make or break emperors. Even average women had roles, working in shops, weaving cloth, or midwifing births. They attended theaters, baths, and festivals, mingling and networking. Sure, society wasn't equal, double standards abounded, like harsher rules on adultery for women, but power wasn't just about votes, it was about connections, smarts, and access. Roman women navigated that expertly, often steering from the sidelines or right next to the throne. Whispered words in an emperor's ear that could change history more than any ballot. The classic wrap-up for Rome's story. It all crumbled because everyone got too lazy, corrupt, and hooked on luxury, rotting from the inside like overripe fruit. It's a neat, preachy explanation, perfect for sermons or cautionary tales, but it's way too simple and misses the big picture. Every society has its share of scandals, bribes, and wild living. Rome wasn't special there. Elites threw lavish parties, emperors like Nero splashed cash on palaces, and betrayals happened left and right. But blaming the whole collapse on moral decay is like saying a bridge fell because the builders partied too hard, ignoring the real cracks. The Western Empire's slow fade in the 5th century involved a tangle of issues. Military-wise, it overreached. Guarding borders from Scotland to the Sahara meant constant wars, draining cash for armies of 400,000 plus soldiers. Recruiting locals got tough, so they hired more barbarian mercenaries who sometimes turned coat. Economically, inflation spiked as coins lost value, taxes squeezed farmers into bankruptcy, and plagues like the Antonine 165-180 AD wiped out millions, shrinking the workforce. Trade slowed with pirate raids and unsafe roads. Politically, emperors flipped faster than pancakes, over 20 in the 3rd century alone, sparking civil wars that wrecked unity. Barbarian invasions weren't just hordes. Groups like the Visigoths or Vandals often started as allies, settling inside borders for land and jobs, but flipped when Rome reneged on deals. Climate shifts hurt crops, adding famine. Meanwhile, the Eastern Empire Byzantines chugged along for another millennium, with the same decadent culture proving it wasn't just vice. If luxury killed Rome, why did Constantinople thrive? Because falls come from piled-up stresses, not one sin. Rome actually lasted so long by adapting, extending citizenship to provincials in 212 AD for more taxes and troops, splitting the empire in 395 AD for better management, blending with invaders. It wasn't a quick moral flop. It was centuries of pressures wearing down a giant. That's less dramatic than too much wine did them in, but way more fascinating. History as a messy web, not a tidy lesson. Before she was ever hailed as Augusta or bowed to by legions, Julia Domna started life as a girl from the sun-baked East. Born around 160 AD in Emesa, modern Homs, Syria, a bustling city where caravan routes crossed and temples gleamed with gold, she grew up in a world soaked in mystery and power. Her family wasn't some backwater nobodies. They were the high priests of Elagabal, the sun god, guardians of a sacred black meteorite stone thought to pulse with divine energy. From toddler days, she'd have seen rituals with chanting priests, incense clouds, and crowds seeking blessings. Religion wasn't separate from ruling, it was the family business. Unlike many Roman girls groomed just for wifely duties, Julia's upbringing was rich with ideas. Syria buzzed as a melting pot, Greek thinkers debating in forums, Roman officials enforcing laws, Eastern mystics sharing secrets. She got a solid education, reading philosophy from Plato or Aristotle, mastering rhetoric to argue points sharply, maybe even dipping into astrology, which was huge back then. One stargazer supposedly foretold she'd wed a king, and in that era, such omens weren't jokes. They were hints that spread like wildfire, catching the ear of ambitious men. Enter Septimius Severus, a tough North African general from Leptis Magna in modern Libya, widowed and climbing the ranks. He believed in signs deeply, common for soldiers facing death daily. Around 187 AD, he met Julia, drawn not just to her looks, but her sharp mind and calm confidence in talks. Their wedding was a power move, linking his military muscle with her priestly prestige and Eastern ties. Julia left Emesa's familiar sands for Rome's chaotic whirl, towering aqueducts, roaring crowds in the forum, senators scheming in cool marble halls. She didn't hide away, she observed, learned the subtle games of favor trading and alliance building. Quick lesson, Rome's stability was a fragile act, propped up by army loyalty more than laws. When Emperor Commodus got assassinated in 192 AD, sparking a free-for-all with multiple claimants, Severus pounced. He rallied his legions, marched on Rome, and crushed rivals like Pertinax and Didius Julianus. Julia was right there, becoming empress as he took the throne in 193 AD. The old prophecy clicked into place, but peace, not a chance. Mori wars loomed, and Julia was about to prove she was no fragile ornament. The second Severus grabbed the crown, Rome didn't settle into calm. It teetered on edge, full of grudges from defeated foes and wary senators. He'd beaten 3 rivals, Pescennius Niger in the east, Clodius Albinus in Britain, but holding power meant endless vigilance. Julia didn't stay put in Rome like past empresses, playing hostess. She hit the road with him, enduring grueling campaigns, first to the east against Niger, facing dusty battles and supply woes, then to Parthia, modern Iran, for gritty sieges, and later the foggy, rainy frontiers of Britain, where cold bit through tents and mud slowed everything. This wasn't a vacation, it was smart politics. Severus, an outsider from Africa, needed to prove his Romanness, and Julia's presence humanized him. Soldiers nicknamed her Mater Castrorum, Mother of the Camps, a title echoing the goddess Cybele, implying she watched over them like family. She'd visit troops, hand out bonuses, listen to grievances, building loyalty that could save the throne. Behind scenes, she handled letters to governors, advised on appointments, and kept the imperial machine oiled while Severus focused on fighting. Back in Rome, traditionalists grumbled. A Syrian woman wielding such sway? Unheard of. Whispers called her pushy or foreign, but Julia shrugged it off. She'd learned power wasn't a gift. It was a chess game, strategic moves, quiet alliances, outsmarting threats. As Severus solidified his dynasty, naming their sons co-heirs, Julia emerged as the steady force keeping it all from cracking. With Severus locked in as emperor, Julia Domna leveled up from wife to architect of the future. Her boys, Caracalla, born 188 AD, and Geta, born 189 AD, weren't pampered princes. They were the empire's next chapter, and she molded them like clay. Education was key. Top tutors taught them Greek and Latin literature, philosophy from Stoics like Epictetus, military drills to toughen them up, and even law to understand ruling. Julia picked these mentors for smarts and unwavering loyalty, no risks in a world of plots. But harmony, wishful thinking. The brothers were night and day, Caracalla fiery and paranoid, obsessed with warriors like Alexander, dreaming of conquests and quick to rage. Geta, calmer and bookish, leaned toward paperwork and steady governance. Kid rivalries turned toxic as they grew, fights over toys became battles for favor. Julia pushed unity hard. Public statues showed the family smiling together, coins minted with Felicita's Seculi, Age of Happiness, featuring all four. She mediated, hosted joint events, stressed teamwork. Severus, ever the pragmatist, planned for them to rule together, like Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus had. He took them on campaigns to Britain in 208 AD, hoping shared hardships would bond them. But under the surface, jealousy boiled. Caracalla saw Geta as a threat, and vice versa. Julia's challenge: keep the facade strong, because a divided house could topple the whole empire. Before his death in Britain in 211 AD, yep, that cold, rainy island at the empire's edge, Septimius Severus gathered his sons and gave them some straightforward advice. Stick together, keep the soldiers happy with good pay and respect, and ignore the noise from everyone else. It sounded simple, like a father's last words to avoid family drama. But in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, it was basically impossible. The brothers had been rivals for years, and no pep talk could erase that. When Severus died that year, Caracalla and Geta stepped up as co-emperors, sharing the throne in theory. For Julia Domna, this was her toughest spot yet. She wasn't just backing a solid husband anymore. She was stuck in the middle of two hot-headed young men who eyed each other like enemies. The whole empire was watching, senators in Rome gossiping, governors in the provinces picking sides, and the army sniffing for any sign of weakness that could spark rebellion. Julia jumped into mediator mode. She set up private talks, pushed for joint decisions on things like taxes or military moves, and worked hard to stop factions from forming. But the bad blood ran too deep. The palace turned into a divided house. Servants whispered loyalties, guards favored one brother over the other, and even meals felt tense. Wild ideas floated around, like splitting the empire right down the middle, Caracalla taking the west, Geta the east, to avoid outright war. For Julia, this was the ultimate gut check. She'd poured her life into building this dynasty, from her Syrian roots to the heights of Roman power. Now it was crumbling from the inside, and time was slipping away. She couldn't let it all fall apart, not after everything. The explosion didn't happen on some grand battlefield with clashing armies. It went down right in the heart of the palace, in the most personal way. After months of simmering hate, arguments over everything from coin designs to army commands, Caracalla suggested a peace chat with Geta. "Let's meet in Mom's rooms," he said. "No weapons, just us family." Julia bought into it, hopping her presence, as their mother could melt the ice and bring back some brotherly bond. Maybe she was clinging to hope in a desperate situation. Either way, it was a deadly mistake. As Geta walked into her private chambers, relaxed and unarmed, killers loyal to Caracalla burst out from hiding. Swords swung fast, chaos erupted, shouts, furniture crashing, blood spraying. Geta bolted toward Julia, grabbing her for safety, yelling for her to help. But it was too late. The assassins cut him down right there in her arms. She held him as he bled out, his life slipping away on her floor. Caracalla had picked total control over family, crossing a line that shattered everything. The cleanup was fast and ruthless. Caracalla's men rounded up anyone who might have backed Geta, senators, advisors, even household staff. Old records say thousands died in the crackdown, from quick executions in Rome's streets to hunts across provinces. The city locked down in fear, people keeping their heads down to avoid the purge. Julia, she was left in the wreckage. She just lost one son to the other's blade, in her own home no less. But she couldn't grieve openly. That would look like a challenge to Caracalla, and it might get her killed too. Instead, she swallowed the pain and stayed composed. Geta's name got scrubbed from history, chiseled off monuments, his faces smashed on statues, his records burned. It was damnatio memoriae, the official Roman way to erase someone like they never existed. For Julia, this wasn't some abstract policy. It was ripping away half her heart while pretending everything was fine. Yet she didn't retreat or break. If anything, she dove deeper into running things. Caracalla, now sole emperor, was getting more unstable, paranoid about plots, obsessed with wars, so he leaned on her for the boring but vital stuff, sorting through letters from far-off governors, handling citizen complaints, keeping the bureaucracy humming. Her strength here was unreal. She'd seen the worst a family could do, but she kept the empire steady, proving she was the rock in a stormy sea. While the palace walls dripped with memories of blood and betrayal, Julia Domna carved out a different kind of space, a haven for brains over brawn. As Caracalla roamed the provinces, playing dress-up as Alexander the Great with fancy Macedonian outfits and dreaming of epic wins, Julia stayed put in Rome or Antioch, turning her court into a buzzing hub of smart folks. Philosophers debated big questions, lawyers hashed out legal tweaks, writers pennied books, and speakers practiced their craft. It wasn't just chit-chat. It was her way of leading through ideas in a time when fear ruled everything. She backed heavy hitters like Philostratus, pushing him to write about Apollonius of Tyana, a mystic philosopher whose story mixed deep thoughts, magic, and subtle digs at bad rulers. Her support helped shape Roman law that lasted for ages, influencing courts way beyond her time. Coming from Syria, where Greek ideas met Eastern spirituality, she was at ease blending it all. Philosophy wasn't a hobby for her, it was a tool to steady the ship. In an empire sliding toward brute force, she reminded everyone that smart thinking could build legitimacy and calm the chaos. Caracalla's bloody start had trashed the family's rep with the upper class, so Julia's group of thinkers helped soften that, showing the court as refined and connected to Rome's golden past. People came to her with problems, a governor needing advice on taxes, a scholar sharing a new theory. She bridged the gap between her son's harsh commands and the real-world grind of running provinces. But it all hung by a thread, spies everywhere, Caracalla's trust issues flaring, real and fake plots bubbling. Still, in that tense air, Julia's circle shone as a last bright spot of classic Roman culture, a flicker of reason before darker times rolled in. As the years ticked by, Caracalla's grip got tighter and meaner. He fixated on being a war hero, copying Alexander down to the clothes and hair, dragging the army east toward Parthia for glory grabs. The whole empire felt like one big mobile base camp, constant marches, supply trains stretching miles, soldiers grumbling about endless fights. Julia tagged along, no stranger to the road after years of campaigns from Britain's misty hills to Syria's hot sands. But this felt off. Severus had built smart, lasting wins, while Caracalla chased flash and fear. He favored troops over senators, handing out huge bonuses to keep them loyal, but skimping on talk and deals. Julia picked up the slack behind the scenes, sifting through stacks of reports, fixing provincial messes like bad roads or food shortages, keeping the gears turning. She got that Rome didn't run on big shows alone. It needed the nitty-gritty, balanced books, fair laws, quiet negotiations. His big move, the Constitutio Antoniniana in 212 AD, gave citizenship to almost everyone in the empire, not out of kindness, but to boost taxes and recruits. It shook up everything, creating more paperwork and headaches that Julia helped sort, but even she couldn't rein in his growing paranoia. Heads rolled on whims, generals demoted, officials axed, anyone who looked sideways. His inner group shrank to yes-men he thought were rock solid, including the Praetorian prefect Macrinus, head of the elite guard. In 217 AD, during a dusty trek near Carrhae in Mesopotamia, modern Turkey, Caracalla pulled over for a quick break by the road, stepping away unguarded for what should have been a nothing moment. That's when the killer struck, a sudden stab, and the emperor dropped dead, not in some heroic clash, but in a cheap betrayal. The army scrambled, and Macrinus, quick on his feet, grabbed the throne. He wasn't royal blood, just a sharp administrator from the equestrian class, stepping up in the vacuum. Word hit Julia back in Antioch like a thunderbolt. Her last son gone, the dynasty she'd fought for crushed. The Severan line seemed done, but she didn't crumble right away. Macrinus knew her pull, Eastern troops adored her, officials trusted her smarts. Killing her outright could spark riots or revolts. So for now she hung on, her power fading but not gone yet. Caracalla's murder didn't boot Julia Domna out of the picture overnight. If anything, she stayed key for a hot minute. Macrinus was on shaky ground, no fancy lineage, no army fan club, just a guy who seized the moment. He needed the East calm, and Julia was calm personified. She'd run things from Antioch during wars, earning nods from governors and grunts alike. Even haters respected her brainpower. At first Macrinus played nice, let her stick around, handle some admin tasks like old times, but it was a tightrope. Julia had no heirs left to shield her, her clout was all vibe and history now, and vibes can flip fast. Macrinus soon saw her as a threat. Severan loyalists whispered in barracks, dreaming of a comeback. Julia picked up on the chill, fewer invites to meetings, letters going unanswered, her say shrinking. She'd survived wars, killings, and court games for decades. She read the room like a pro. On top of that, her health was tanking. Old texts hinted a bad illness, maybe breast cancer, with constant pain wearing her down after years of stress, travel, and heartbreak. She'd seen one son slaughter the other, watched the survivors spiral, and now faced being sidelined. Macrinus finally ordered her back to Rome, couched as proper etiquette, but really a power strip. For the woman once called mother of the camps, who'd advised emperors and steadied realms, this was a gut punch. It wasn't just politics, it hit her core sense of self. When Julia Domna realized her days in the game were done, she didn't freak out or beg. She thought it through, cool as ever. Heading back to Rome would mean a public downgrade, from empire shaper to forgotten widow, maybe under house arrest or worse. The trip alone would parade her fall. Plus, her body was breaking, pain that wouldn't quit, weakness creeping in after a lifetime on the move. Julia had always called her own shots, from marrying Severus on a prophecy's nudge to steering through bloodbaths without losing her cool. She wasn't about to let Macrinus script her end. In 217 AD, still in Antioch, she chose to bow out on her terms. Some say she starved herself, others hint at poison or a blade. Details fuzzy, but the point clear. It was her decision, quiet and controlled, fitting the Roman code of dignitas, keeping your honor intact, even in loss. In a world where rulers often got hacked by their guards, she went out with grace. Macrinus let her body go back to Rome, eventually tucked into Hadrian's mausoleum, now Castel Sant'Angelo, with other Severans. Even he got her importance. But her story didn't fade right away. In the east, her sister Julia Misa rallied folks behind Misa's grandson, a teen priest of Elagabal from Emesa. By 218 AD, Macrinus got toppled in a revolt, and the kid, Emperor Elagabalus, brought Severan blood back briefly, followed by Severus Alexander. Julia's web of allies outlived her, proving her lasting touch. She'd started as a Syrian priest's daughter, propelled by stars and smarts into Rome's core. She ended as one of the sharpest empresses ever, a navigator of wars, family horrors, and power plays, all with unbreakable poise. Her bones rested, but her mark lingered. After she was gone, Rome didn't clock the gap right away. Julia Domna never ruled solo, never led charges or stamped laws with her name. But for years, she'd been the unseen glue holding a sprawling, violent empire together. Without her steady hand, the smart admin and cultural buzz she fostered started to dim. Her sister Misa did snag the throne back for the family through Elagabalus, but it was messy, full of weird rituals and scandals, lacking Julia's thoughtful edge. Empire slid toward more show than substance, with the 3rd century crisis looming, endless emperor swaps, economic crashes, invasions piling on. What set Julia apart wasn't just toughing out brutality, it was mixing power with brains. Her gatherings shaped laws that echoed for centuries, sparked debates on right and wrong in tough times, and pushed stories that tied empire to morals. Roman history brims with fierce women like Agrippina or Livia, often tagged as schemers or scandals. Julia. She's remembered for quieter strength, leading with ideas. Born Syrian, steeped in Greek wisdom, ruling Roman style, she mirrored the empire's mix at its peak. Under the Severans, Rome went global and she drove that shift. But it cost her, watching fratricide up close, seeing a son turn tyrant, enduring endless stress and sickness. She worked the man's world without flipping tables, just mastering it from inside. Her court was a final hurrah for old-school Roman smarts before chaos deepened. She couldn't save Rome forever, but for her era, through clever moves, calm vibes, and big ideas, she kept the fragile giant standing. That showed intellect could steer history, even in the storm, to be continued. Since this history is pretty long, I'll wrap up this part here. The rest will come in the next section. I'm splitting it into 2 parts, so it's easier to turn into a video. Sound good?